from verse 3 down to verse 22. Please forgive me if I read a bit fast. You shall not eat any of abominations. These are the animals that you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. Every animal that parts the hoof and has hoof cloven in two, and chews the cud among the animals, you may eat. Yet of those that chew the cud or have the hoof cloven, you shall not eat these: the camel, the hare, the rock badger, because they chew the cud, but do not part the hoof, they are unclean to you. And the pig, because it parts the hoof, but does not chew the cud, it is unclean for you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. Of all that are in the waters you may eat these. Whatever has fins and scales you may eat, and whatever does not have fins and scales you shall not eat. It is unclean for you. You may eat all clean birds, but these are the ones that you shall not eat: the eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, any raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl and the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, the cormorant, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. And all winged insects are unclean for you. They shall not be eaten. All clean winged things you may eat. You shall not eat anything that has died naturally. You may give it to the sojourner who is within your towns, and he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. So here we see some dietary restrictions that's put upon the people of Israel. We just see that there is a distinction that's made between clean food and unclean food. For those of us that were here as we studied Leviticus, you'll know it's pretty much exactly the same as Leviticus chapter 11, which I guess is good. It's nice to know that things haven't changed since Leviticus chapter 11. We'd be in a bit of a conundrum if Moses just changed the list halfway through, but he's saying there's a difference between clean food and unclean food. And there are different theories, and people have written books, and there's actually kind of diet books out there called, like, I forget what it's called, but the Jerusalem diet or the Israel wilderness diet. See that some of these things, there do seem to be dietary benefits that come from it. I'm not going to get into all of it. I know that no one really cares that much, but we see like the vulture and kind of these birds that would be eating lots of dead things. That's a pretty good way to avoid that, to avoid getting illnesses or foodborne illnesses, would be to avoid creatures that eat dead animals all the time. And so we see there's things like that which could be possible dietary benefits. Also, we need to think about a world where there's no refrigeration and there's people who wander in the desert. And so perhaps there's just reasons why certain things are not to be eaten or to be considered unclean. And like I mentioned before, some people could make a good case about why it is actually healthier to do this. There's also books that write and say that's not the case. And I'm not a dietitian, and I don't really want to make a firm stance on something I'm not really educated in. But what I know is that it is, coming back to that main theme of this whole thing, is that they're to be a distinct people, a group of people that are different than every other nation on the face of the earth. When it talks about things being clean and unclean, it doesn't necessarily mean dirty and unhealthy and unsafe. Because you'll notice in verse 21, it talks about certain things that the people of Israel are not supposed to eat, but that other people can eat. Not that they can go get sick and die on their own, but that it's fine. It's fit for human consumption, but they're just not to eat it. And so we see that as they eat, eating is one of the most consistent things that we do. Day in and day out, we eat. Loads of times, 3 big meals, and lots of times in between. Last night, a bunch of pancakes. We eat. It's part of our days. And God would say to them that as you eat, I want there to be a distinction about the way that you eat and the things that you eat. Every time you sit down for a meal, it's to remind you that you are different. You're surrounded by all these people, and they eat loads of other things, but you have a distinct diet, you eat in a distinct way because you're my distinct people. what bearing does this have upon us today? I made a nice connection between the grief and then us today. People are wondering, does this mean, Mike, I can't eat bat? Or the hoopoe? Well, yeah, the cormorants, the hare, the rock badger. So in Mark chapter 7, Jesus has an interaction with the religious leaders of the day. And as we've been studying through the Gospel of Mark, we just see they're so consistently trying to trap him and to catch him out, to corner him into saying something foolish. And they talk to him about ceremonial cleanness. And I guess really the question has to do about washing their hands in a certain way. They're saying, Jesus, your disciples don't wash your hands in the traditional way. What's wrong with that? And then in Mark chapter 7, Jesus goes on he just talks about the fact that it's not the washing of hands, it's not even, he says, the eating of certain foods that makes a person clean or unclean. He says it's not what goes in you, but it's what comes out of you that makes a person unclean. And then there's a little comment as the writer Mark says, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods to be clean. It's Mark 7:19 that it says that Jesus declared all foods to be clean. And then in Acts chapter 10, we see that the Apostle Peter is up on top of his roof enjoying the sun and praying, and then he has a vision, a very distinct and unique vision of a bunch of animals, many of which would be listed in here. And they're on a sheet, and they're coming down from heaven. And he hears the voice of God say, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And he says, "Well, God, I've not done that sort of thing. I've kept the dietary restrictions. I've avoided the hoopoe, and I've avoided the ostrich and the nighthawk." And God says, "No, kill it and eat it." He says, "What I have made clean, you do not declare unclean." So perhaps Peter should have understood what Jesus was saying years earlier, back in Mark chapter 7, but because perhaps he didn't, God gave him a vision where he very distinctly said, "What I have declared clean, you don't call unclean." Of course, this doesn't have to do exactly with food, because the next bit is when he's sent to the Gentile Cornelius. And so as much as God says, "I have made all the food, and all the food is clean to you, enjoy whatever you want, kill and eat it," the next step is to say, well, the people, the Gentiles, the people like Cornelius, the people who work for the Romans, I'm declaring them to be clean. Go to them and preach this good news to them. So Peter then, we see that there's kind of this just transition as the nation of Israel as a distinct entity had their distinct rules, their distinct laws. And then Jesus comes and sends his disciples to all the nations. And those distinct ethnic traits and habits and commands for the people of Israel, well, they are fulfilled. And they go out. And so we are free to, if I could just say it in a sentence, we can eat whatever food we like to the glory of God with thankful hearts. We can eat whatever food we like, according to Mark 7, according to Acts 10. To the glory of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, there's a lot of questions that are being asked to Paul about the subject of food. And in 10, verse 27, down to the end of the paragraph, he talks to them about food, what kind of food they can eat, what kind of food they can't eat. His answer, you can see at the end, is eat it all to the glory of God. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So that no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner, and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you, without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, "This has been offered in sacrifice," Then do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you, and for the sake of your conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thanksgiving, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So, is the key verse, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all for the glory of God. When we come to matters of food, and I would say everything else, a great question to ask is, can I do this to the glory of God? Can I eat this to the glory of God? If Jesus was sitting next to me, would I offer it to him? Would this be something that I can glorify God in the midst of doing? So I think we talk about these food issues. Do you think, does this bring glory to God? And it's possible to drink orange juice to the glory of God. It's possible to drink tea to the glory of God. And so I would encourage you to eat a bat to the glory of God.